Let's talk about why people are upset about Donald Trump and Pete Hegseth's recent remarks. More than remarks, recent speeches in front of all of the top generals of the United States from around the world where they had been stationed previously to being called into this. All right, let's talk about what it's not. It is not a criticism, and we should, by the way, those of us who are upset about it, should not make it a criticism of whether people in the military are fat. All right, Pete Hegseth. People who want to support this speech by him are like, what's the problem with saying we need to have a military that's not fat? We do need those standards. Okay, that's fine. I agree with you. I don't have any problem with saying that every individual in the military should have the personal discipline to maintain a good physique. Okay? I maintain a good physique. I'm not in the military. You can do it even as you age. You can do it. That's fine. Have that standard. That's completely fine. Adjust that expectation. Completely fine. No one does or ought to have a problem with that. And when we focus on that, we're distracting from the things that are actually disturbing. We're trying to tear down somebody's character. Look, this is not a time for anybody's ego to get involved, including Donald Trump's, including Pete Hegseth's. But it's not a time for people's ego to get involved um, in the opposite sense either. Those who are opposed to those people, opposed to what they said, it's not a time for us to get our egos involved with this or make fun of Pete for the way that he did chin-ups at the end of a set. From what I understand, a set that included 100 push-ups, 50 chin-ups, and he was doing his chin-ups. All right, I will acknowledge this criticism because it is correct. He was doing them hands this way. It's easier than doing it hands this way. And RFK was at least, apparently, I mean, I haven't watched the whole thing, but I've seen the little clips of each of them. RFK was at least doing them this way, which is harder. I mean, if you've done either of those things, I know that when I was doing chin-ups, I could do 30 plus this way, and I struggled to get over 20 this way. And I did them this way, but I'm not in the military. I'm not facing off against somebody. I was just doing them for personal growth. So that's my little tangent there. But look, that's not the focus. That's not the issue. I don't care how he does chin ups. It doesn't really matter. If you're challenging someone, you should both at least be doing them the same way. That's all. He is a pretty physically fit guy. I'm not going to argue that. People who are in the military should probably maintain a high standard of physical fitness, even once they reach a higher rank and they're no longer on the front lines. They should probably still maintain that. It is a better image. That's all completely fine. But if we're going to talk about things that aren't a good image, let's talk about the fact that pulling all of the top generals from around the world into a single place, out of their positions, out of their stations around the world into a single place. And the world knows this. It's broadcast. It was stated in advance. The world knows that every single one of those top generals are going to be removed from their normal places and brought into the same place. As far as we know, no security threat happened or occurred, and nobody attempted to take advantage of that around the world. But that's not a good look for the military. It's also not a good look for the military for somebody who has not attained the status and the level of experience that those generals attained to be speaking to them and basically chewing them out in some regards. I think that Pete and Donald Trump really thought that some of this was going to be much better received than it was. They thought they're going to say, "Hey guys, we're turning you loose," and all these guys were like, "Yeah, that's what we've always wanted," and they didn't really get that response. So I don't think that Pete Hegseth really realized how much this was going to come across like him calling out or chewing out um, people who have achieved a much higher rank than he ever did, and people who have a far greater level of experience in the military than he ever had or will have. Um, but that's really what it looked like. Like, I'm tired of seeing this, I'm tired of seeing that. You got to do this better. You need to uphold these standards. Okay, if you want different standards in the military, pursue that. All right. Go ahead, pursue that. It's fine. It's probably, as I said, it may be a good thing. Those individual standards themselves may be a good thing. But publicly addressing those generals in that way, that was a far worse look than a few overweight guys in the military. And when he said, worldwide, it's not a good look. People are watching. The world is watching. Look, the whole world is watching that broadcast. It was broadcast on multiple stations, including Fox, but NBC and any others are also broadcasting it because they're both all gonna pull different things out of it. They're all gonna have a different take on it, but it's broadcast. It's available to everybody, and what you see is a Secretary of War, if that's what you want to call him, and a commander-in-chief who are at odds with the military itself of their own country, trying to initiate significant changes, stating a bunch of things that they are not content with and the way it currently is, all publicly, with all of our enemies watching, to view the fact that it is on display that our commander-in-chief and the head of the Department of War, as they now call it, are not on the same page, or are suggesting that they're not on the same page, because you don't tell somebody to change something. You don't say we're going to change this, that, and the other if you're already on the same page. So whether you like it or not, the fact is that they're saying we're not on the same page, and they're saying it publicly. Wow. If you really want to tell everybody around the world that we're at a critical point, there's a potential weakness, there's potential division, let's just broadcast that to the whole world. Okay? What am I more concerned about? A senior officer in the military who's a little bit overweight? Or that? Come on, guys. I didn't mean to make this something where I kind of made my point in that kind of way. I wanted to be a little more neutral, like, here's what people are upset about. This is why people didn't like it. But when you really think this through, it's kind of hard to not be like, come on, think about this. Right? And we don't win wars. We don't have probably the most effective military in the world. Currently, not after Trump fixes it, not after Hegseth fixes it, but currently, right now, we have probably the most effective military in the world. And this is something that Republicans and conservatives would have agreed with me on, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, maybe even 2 years ago. It hasn't changed much since then. We did not get there through people's egos getting in the way and having this sort of like, Mel Gibson approach to the military. We aren't dominant around the world because, one guy here or there let their ego get in the way. And when Pete Hegseth is doing chin-ups or pull-ups or whatever he's doing, and giving this kind of speech and whatnot, that's ego, right? That's his personal ego. If I can maintain a high level of physical fitness, then everybody else should be able to do that. Okay, but you're speaking from a place of ego, and you're allowing that to get in the way of what actually matters, which is having a refined, cohesive, capable military in which a few people can be overweight and it's not going to be a national security risk, right? Is it good to impose that standard and expectation that people maintain a certain level of physical fitness and it could be tested? It could continue to be tested even as people rise through the ranks? Sure, yeah, that could be a good thing. But you're going after something that's not a national security risk, and you're creating one in the process. That's your ego. That is Pete Hegseth's ego, taking the place of all the things that the military has built itself into over the course of decades and decades of refining what is effective, what gets the job done, what maintains our place as the dominant military force in the world. And that's something that I've come to realize, watching some of the generals and retired generals who are speaking about this now, in response to this. And I might not have listened to them 10 years ago because, I didn't want to hear anything about the military. I didn't think that, problems should be solved using the military. Well, what I'm realizing is that having a highly effective military like the one we already have is important, and that there are a lot of extremely disciplined people with a lot of personal integrity who have risen through the ranks and been exceptional leaders of that organization, of that institution. As much as I personally want to find solutions to problems worldwide that don't involve the military, having it there, having it present, and having it with its reputation as being one of the best, if not the best in the world, that is probably something that does a lot of favors for the United States and for our allies worldwide. And I've realized that there has to be some level of trust from all of us as citizens, including those of us who don't prefer to rely on the military. There has to be some trust from us that they are focused on the right things and on doing the right things the right way to protect and serve this country and the oath that they swore to the Constitution. So this whole situation is opening my eyes to a few things that, and it's really, really interesting. It's really interesting how, having this all get pushed on in different ways than any of us really expected years ago is, pushing people who used to be over here, and people who used to be over here are being pushed more over there. And we're digging into things and coming to different conclusions than we expected to come to. And sometimes that's a good thing. It's also pretty disturbing. I don't like to use the word concerning, scary, things like that. I think you have to, as much as possible, courageously face whatever is in front of you. not let concern or fear take over your mindset, your mentality. But disturbing, yes, it is disturbing. And part of what's disturbing, and this is, the crux of it, part of what's really disturbing is the President of the United States saying that the military should use some of the cities within the United States as practice grounds for war, with our enemies. You don't practice on your fellow citizens what you intend to do to your enemies. Period. There is no way to rephrase that or explain it in a way that makes it okay. You can say that we have serious, severe disagreements within this nation, within this country. You can say that you are concerned that those disagreements are so great that they might lead to violence, or that they might lead to something that you don't want them to lead to, but to be the one initiating them, leading to that, to be the one calling in the troops on your own citizens, even if you're calling it practice, I'm sorry, but you do not practice anything other than what you intend to actually do. So if what you intend to do, in the words of Pete Hegseth, is unleash severe violence on the enemy, to demoralize them, to basically obliterate them, let's connect the dots. When you say practice on our cities, that's what you are saying we are going to practice on our own civilians, on our own cities. Do not try to explain this away. Again, I set out just to explain something, explain why people are upset, but the fact is, those are the words that were said, and it is disturbing. Don't stick your head in the sand. This is not a time to stick your head in the sand. It's certainly not a time to stand up for the people who said those things. It is not a time to take your personal vendetta about somebody who's on the opposite side of the political spectrum as you and say, yeah, go get them. Because when that's the mindset, when that's allowable within this country that stands for freedom, freedom of speech, freedom of thought, freedom of expression, freedom to carry guns, freedom to vote leaders in and out based on what you do and do not want, based on their performance, freedom to express dissatisfaction with your leaders. In this country, we do not do that to each other. You can disagree with people. You can debate. You can oppose them politically. You can build momentum for your movement. You can try to take back seats in the elections. You can try to take back the presidency for your side in the elections. You can do all that, but you do not wage war on people because you disagree with them. And President Trump recently tweeted that he was going to send in the National Guard to the, quote, war zone of Portland, Oregon. Portland is not a war zone. I've been to Portland fairly recently. There was absolutely nothing violent going on there in any way. There was a pride march while I was in Portland. I didn't go for that. It was coincidental. I went for work. I had a pickup scheduled in Portland, Oregon, on the way to and from other pickups and deliveries. And it so happened that there was a pride march going on, and I really didn't want there to be that going on because it just meant more traffic in the city. But people are allowed to have the opinion that they have about um, about their own or other people's sexuality, etc. It's not, I'm going to be honest here, it's not a topic that interests me very much. However, people are allowed to have whatever viewpoint they have on it, and they're allowed to have a celebration of what they believe. They're allowed to march for it, whatever, have an event, all of which was completely peaceful, all of which was like well organized, and you're allowed to do that in this country. You're allowed to believe what you believe. You're allowed to stand up for what you believe in a peaceful, nonviolent way. And now, even as the military, in some sense, has moved into Portland, and they're dressed up in full riot gear, and they're facing off against people who are like all seated, and they're just holding up signs. It's completely peaceful. There's no reason for them to be there. There is no war zone. Donald Trump sent troops, sent the National Guard into a city that was not experiencing violence. Now, you could make the case about a few other cities that he's chosen to do this with, that they were experiencing violence. Whether it was appropriate to respond to that violence by sending in the National Guard is a different question. But you can make the case that there was violence and that was what was being addressed. In Portland, you cannot make that case. It was not, and is not violent in Portland, Oregon. People are expressing their First Amendment right to free speech. That's the only thing that's happening. So it's really, really hard to convince me that the president cares about free speech equally for both sides or all sides, when that is the only thing I see happening that has warranted the response of sending in the National Guard. And what it looks like is trying to instigate some sort of violence, some sort of conflict. Like, let's put these people dressed in hazmat suits, let's make it look like a war zone and hope that people rise to the occasion. Let's hope that if we make it look like a war zone, people will start to treat it like a war zone. If we put people in armor there, people will start to test that armor. Let's get it to become violent, because it's not violent now. And why would you send in the National Guard to a place that is not violent now? Some people would say maybe you're expecting violence in the future, but there was no reason to expect it. What you're trying to do is provoke violence. The words and the actions of the president match up. And I know I have friends who say, no, he's not doing any of that. No, he really cares about people. No, he would never. Look, the words and the actions match up. You're in denial. I'm sorry, you're in denial. You don't see and hear what is happening, even though the words and the actions align to paint one picture, and that picture is very clear. but you're getting all, and I've admitted to my friends recently, okay, maybe I get all of my information from one side, and I need the other side, the information from the other side, to call out the things that are wrong with the information I'm getting. Or I really should say, to give me the information that I'm not getting. Because both sides are really good at calling out the other side. So if I'm not listening to information from the conservative or Republican side of things, then I'm not getting their effective calling out of things that need to be called out on the left side. There are things that need to be called out on the left side, and this is not a leftist video, because I think that there's a lot of concerning things happening on both sides, and I want to hear about the things that are concerning that are happening on the left side. However, the left side is not in power right now. The left does not have the presidency. And the left, incidentally, has never used the presidency to do what Donald Trump is currently doing right now. So I think that does need to be the focus. And once we fix that really major issue, then we can, and we should sit down with each other and talk and be like, well, okay, what's really going on that made this all get so bad? Okay, people on the right, people who are conservative, people who are Republicans, people who are Trump supporters, what is it that you don't like? What is it that makes you feel so hostile towards half of everybody in the nation? And we should actually listen to that. And we should actually try to resolve these things. However, I don't think that we should let what's going on continue to go on. I don't think we should be unaware of it. I don't think that we should be in denial. I don't think you should be in denial. To the point that you're not going to at least use your vote to turn things around. I'm sorry, but Donald Trump, maybe he's a nice person. I don't know. Maybe he has someone blackmailing him. Maybe there's a bunch of money involved. Maybe, I don't know. I'm not going to sit here and connect all of this to his moral character. I don't know what it's like to be him, but I do know that the actions he's taking are wrong, and the words that he's saying tell me that they're intentional and that they will continue unless the American people, in a very big way, say no. And the easiest, best, most nonviolent way we can say no is at the polls and by voting. And there are a lot, I'm going to be honest here, there are a lot of people who have brown skin who are probably terrified to go out and vote in the midterms. And that's for good reason, because the Supreme Court has recently ruled that ICE can target anybody through ethnic profiling, through racial profiling. That can be the cause of an arrest. They still have to, or should, or are supposed to have to prove that that person has violated a law before they are prosecuted, before they are potentially deported. And by the way, just to put this out there for the record, I am not opposed to deporting illegal immigrants. And I'm absolutely not opposed to deporting violent or criminal illegal immigrants, criminal of any kind, robbery, theft, extortion, fraud, involvement in scams, anything that's hurting people around them who are here legally. I am very much for deporting, especially those who are engaged in any sort of criminal activity at all. However, um, the Supreme Court has opened the door to using intimidation, or I'm sorry, we'll skipped a few steps there. They have opened the door to racially profiling people and arresting them on the basis of simply that racial profiling, or I should say, taking into custody. No one wants to be taken into custody. I don't want to be walking down the street. I don't want to be going to vote. I don't want to be walking into the store or to my job and be taken into custody where I then have to prove that I didn't do whatever somebody assumed I did just because of my skin color. I don't want that, and nobody should want that, and nobody should think it's acceptable that anybody else has to deal with it. Even if I can prove it, that's un-American. And I'm frankly shocked that the court came to that ruling, but they did. That opens the door to abuse the role of ICE for the purpose of intimidation, and it's being done. I believe it's being done already. And that's a huge problem. And another reason I believe it's being done is because we need to connect some dots here. And what I said earlier when I jumped ahead, Donald Trump said that we're going to use our cities as practice for what we will do to our enemies, right? What he really said was we're going to use our cities as practice for the military. Well, what does the military do? According to Pete Hegseth, in the same meeting, the military demoralizes and unleashes extreme violence on our enemies, or at least that's what he wants to see them do under his leadership. Okay, so what is the military going to practice on those cities? They're going to practice the things that they're going to do eventually. That's the definition of practice. You only practice things that you're planning to do. So they're going to practice that. Okay? So Donald Trump has also repeatedly, let's just get this clear too, has repeatedly called anybody on the left enemy. Right? Not really differentiating extremists or violent or potentially violent people, or those who maybe really deserve to be called an enemy, but just lumping in anybody on the left as if it's interchangeable. And it's not. I assure you, I have friends both on the left and right. For a very long time, I've considered myself non-political, but the absurdity of what's happening right now is making me want to become political in order to oppose it. I have friends on both the left and the right. And all of them, on both the left and the right, are reasonable people who are going to treat you nicely if they see you out in public, or, you know, even if they have a disagreement with you, it's going to be a pretty reasonable discussion, and they're going to be reasonable people. You just hold different priorities in their political viewpoints, right? This whole concept that the left is the enemy is an intentional fabrication, right? It's an intentional misrepresentation of millions of people who simply believe that we want to maybe prioritize affordable health care for Americans, things like that are actually at the top of the left's agenda in most cases. And there are some people who are more extreme and who have more extreme or fringe, priorities. But the bulk of people on the left have priorities like making sure healthcare is affordable for all Americans, and making sure that children have access to quality education, things like that. Those are the stated priorities of the Democratic Party. Again, we could get into all the fringe um, or extreme examples of what people who see themselves as being on the left believe. There's also extreme and fringe examples on the right of what people believe. But that's the reality of what people on the left, kind of why they are on the left. That's what they want. That's what they think is important. You can agree or disagree, but they're not your enemies. They're not out to get you, I promise you. Um, but the more and more polarized and apart we grow, the more that does become the reality, and we should bring ourselves back together a little bit. And that's going to happen through conversations and trying to understand other people's viewpoints and not demonizing them, but realizing that they're a human being who holds the opinion that they hold for some reason, and we can talk about it. That's really, really important right now. And that's not how Donald Trump or Pete Hegseth want to handle things. And those of us who disagree with that, those of us who see that they are saying we will, treat other Americans as the enemy, and we will use the armed forces against those citizens and civilians of this country, against our fellow countrymen. That needs to be done. That needs to go. And I don't know what that looks like. It might look like finding an alternate conservative candidate that you can support, because I understand, if you hold conservative values, you want a person in office who holds conservative values. I could make a whole video about all the conservative values that Donald Trump says he holds but doesn't seem to actually hold. But either way, you have those values, you want someone who represents those values for you in office. I understand. You don't need to compromise on that, but you do need to let your representatives know that they need to start representing your desire, which hopefully is not to go to war with your fellow American citizens and countrymen. They need to start standing up for that, or you will find a candidate who does. Right? I am positive that there are conservative people who are interested in running for office from all 50 states who do not agree with how Donald Trump is handling these types of things and who would stand up to him on them. And so if the current person, the current representative is not willing to do that, let them know that we'll still vote conservative, but we're going to find somebody. We're going to make somebody. If there's some guy or girl, or gal, whatever, but it is, come on, it's conservative party. It's more likely to be a guy. Sorry. But, and that's obviously not true across the board. But either way, we're going to find somebody who doesn't have a whole lot of support, but he or she has values that we can stand behind. And we're going to have a grassroots campaign to build them up and replace you with them. And we need to, in my opinion, we need to send a message through the vote at midterms. And you can vote conservative, you can vote Democrat, whatever. You can vote for whoever you want, but don't vote for a person who is falling in line with Trump, who is lockstep with Trump. I know there's going to be people who disagree with me. However, the words, the actions, the intentions, none of them are reflective of the America that we all grew up in and love, and that we want for our children. I don't want a civil war for me, for anybody else, especially for the kids. I got to have a good childhood. I know not every single person in the United States had a good childhood. I got to have a good childhood and not live in fear and terror and all sorts of stuff that could happen if we keep going down this road. The time to stand up before it is too late is now. And it's not just in the vote, it's in the conversations that we have on a daily basis with the people we know and the people we respect. Let's quit with the we don't talk about politics thing. We need to talk about politics. Um, we need to let people that we disagree with know that we can still respect them, that we still care about them. And if you're questioning the narrative, you need to go ahead and question that narrative publicly. Because it needs to be questioned, and it needs to be questioned now, and it needs to be questioned on a grand scale. I don't have anything else to say. Thank you for watching.